Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm Liza Lawrence. I'm glad to have you join me as we celebrate wonders and miracles together. All right, well, I am here today with my friend Paulette. She is from LA, California, but living in Idaho now, and she has been an inspiration to me through the years, and she has just an amazing story of faith and God and struggle and all those beautiful things that life has to offer. She is an author of a book called Memoirs of a Marginal Mormon. And if you want to hear more of her story, jump into that book. It's a phenomenal book and very well written, beautifully written. So I'm excited to have Paulette on the show today. And Paulette, welcome. And maybe, I don't know where you want to start. Do you want to start in your childhood? Give us some background of how you grew up and then how you came to know God.
I like that, Liza. Thank you for having me on the show. And I like that beginning because C.S. Lewis says that nothing can seem extraordinary until you've discovered what is ordinary.
I love that.
So that's a great place to start, is with the ordinary. When I spoke at my mother's funeral, I know a lot of people were probably there to hear the dirt and may have been disappointed when I simply said we had an international, varied, and broad upbringing. But that's the minimalization of what actually happened. But my mother was, by the time she was 21, she had had 6 children from 3 different fathers. So basically, she was a child raising children. She had had some violent experiences in her younger years that caused her to drop out of school when she was 13. She was basically uneducated. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't say illiterate, mm-hmm. because she could write, she could articulate herself, but her jobs were mostly blue collar jobs, waitress, nightclub dancer, that sort of thing, moving around a lot. We moved 50 times by the time I was 15. She ended up being married. There's some confusion, somewhere between 7 and 8 times. My dad went to prison for murder. I have a brother who was incarcerated for nearly 40 years. So our lives were very, I like that word, international. Many of my mother's boyfriends, almost everything you can think of as far as ethnicity, religion, all of that sort of thing, including the occult, just the big picture of crazy. It was, embrace the crazy. That's what it was. So I went to a lot of different schools. I dropped out of high school when I was 15. Basically, I went to a new school. I walked in, went into the office, got the paperwork. And as I recall it, Liza, I just couldn't take being treated the way I was treated in the school system for one more second. It was that denigrating, you're a student, you don't know anything. And I had been forging my own paperwork for years. And here I was, 15, being treated that way. And I walked out with a stack of paperwork, and I was going to sit on a bench and just fake it all and hand it back in. And I just thought, I watched the students walking back and forth, and I just thought, why am I doing this? And I just stood up and walked out. I said, I'm done. And so that was that. And through a series of events, I left home and ended up working at a major corporation in America. I was the youngest person to have the job. The youngest person before me was 27. I was 18. It still completely bamboozles my mind to consider that there I was. And it was a place where there were a lot of Hollywood types, a lot of well-known names. One time a guy walked in, and he was a member of the establishment where I worked. And he walked in and tossed me his keys and said, "Do you want to take her for a ride?"
Wow.
And I said, "Really? Sure." So I walked out, and it was a DeLorean. Oh, and wow. Now that's not very exciting, but back then it was Back to the Future, and he had left the car door open. I got in the car. I had no idea what to do in that car. How to even turn it on. I had no idea. And I thought, if I close that door, I'll get stuck in here. Uh-huh. So I walked back in. 10 minutes later, I just sat there and rubbed the seats and did what I thought you're supposed to do with something amazing. And I got back in and I tossed him the keys and I said, "Wow, that was remarkable. Thank you. And that was the end of that experience, right?
That's awesome.
But I grew up on welfare, food stamps, all of those things. We were turned into CPS many times. And so to end up in a place that was very affluent and so forth that's enough of a shock right there. If I stopped right there, that's remarkable.
Right. And what was your mindset seeing those two different worlds? Do you remember how you felt about that?
I actually do. Growing up in poverty and without education, of course, the one solution to life's problems, money.
Mm-hmm. Right.
If I just had the money, then all my problems would go away. And I was actually very deflated. It was a powerful experience to go there. I worked there 3 years and probably put in 60, 70 hours a week, many weeks. I remember one New Year's Eve, my boss came and found me. There was a huge function going on. A lot of movie stars standing around in $10,000 gowns and that sort of thing. There were certain rules. We weren't allowed to approach anyone and say, oh, can I get your autograph on this napkin or something? I mean, obviously, there were very strict rules. But he came up and he said, we've got a problem. I said, okay, what? And he said, there's a problem in the women's bathroom. Could you go take care of it? And I went in the bathroom, and there was a beautiful woman. She looked like the cover of a Cosmopolitan magazine. And she was laying on the floor, retching, and she had drug overdosed, and no one knew what to do with her. And I remember thinking, oh my heavens, these are the exact same problems that I grew up with, only the drugs cost more and the clothes cost more. They didn't get them out of Goodwill dumpsters. And I remember thinking, wow, she has everything and she has nothing. So there's got to be something more than this lie that I've been chasing for these years. Wow. So where I worked was a definite catalyst for change for me, to begin searching for something more. Mm-hmm. And I had nothing to lose. For me, I had nothing to lose. I'd already started at the bottom.
Right.
So if there wasn't a God, that's okay. I could do whatever I had to do to rise on the ladder and do the things that I thought were important. And if there was, then I could walk away from everything if I needed to, whichever way it went. So that began my search right there.
Wow. So tell us about that search. And was God a new concept to you, or had you been exposed to that idea in your youth?
Yeah, I think it's quite miraculous, really. We said prayers like, God is great, God is good, let us thank him for this food. Not often, but I can still repeat it. Uh-huh. So I'm familiar with it. I remember sitting and smoking. I started smoking in 5th grade. I remember sitting and smoking my cigarette with my grandparents, and they're drinking their coffee, and we're all together watching. We'd watch 60 Minutes, and then we would watch Hour of Power with Robert Schuller. Brilliant show. He had the Crystal Cathedral down in Southern California, and it was televised. And so I had exposure to religion. There was no specific religion. My mother, I think that she had some desire within herself as well to know truth and to know God, though perhaps not the education or direction to find it, which is remarkable that she eventually did. To me, that's a miracle right there. Uh-huh. I remember one time, being a nightclub dancer, she dressed accordingly. And I grew up in that, so I dressed accordingly as well. And one Sunday we went marching into this church, and the minister or preacher was out there talking, and we walked in. We were late. And I remember the shame and the embarrassment of being late. I was a teenager, and we were wearing some pretty hot dresses, I would just say. And we walked in, and my mother, I don't know what she was thinking. We walked to the very front pew and sat down. And halfway through the minister or preacher's address, he stopped what he was saying and he stared straight down at us. And I remember the absolute shame, just feeling scrutinized under a magnifying glass, and clearly the message that you don't belong here and you're not good enough to be here. You're not our kind. It was as strong of a message. And I was fairly familiar with that message growing up, but that was a significant moment. And at that moment, his face turned that kind of purple color that we get. And he was staring straight at my mother and I, and he started pointing his finger and going back and forth and saying, "You women of the world." I still remember this. He said, "You invite rape, you invite," and he was yelling and pointing at us. And the shame was just, it was too much for me. I just stared down at the floor, feeling like dirt. And my mother reached over and took my hand, and we stood up and walked out. So, and
Wow.
I do remember the Methodist church and garage sales and the thrift shops and playing cards and bingo and all of that kind of stuff. So it was spotty.
Uh-huh.
No specific religion really. And I had an idea of God, but I think I just didn't like him very much.
I was going to ask you that after that experience, did it turn you off to God? Did you blame God for your circumstances? What was that relationship like?
Yeah, we never really think about that, do we? So many of us go through periods of anger with God. I love that he can take it,
Yes.
that it's not a surprise for him, but simultaneously we don't believe in God. So we claim, I don't believe there is a God, but I am so angry with him. And we
Right.
don't recognize that there's a discrepancy there,
Mm-hmm.
right, in our
Mm-hmm.
beliefs. So angry with God, I think I was more disillusioned. He was a ambiguous concept in the background somewhere. And religion, I really wanted nothing to do with religion. I really did have that mindset that they're a bunch of hypocrites.
Mm-hmm.
People saying they believe in God and then treating others so poorly. Yeah, that's where I was.
So
Yeah.
go back to then 18, maybe you're 20 something now, and recognizing that money isn't solving all your problems or isn't the answer. And so your
Yeah.
search began. What was
Yeah.
that like?
It was remarkable. I think it began, my search for God has defined my life. But truly it has. It's defined my life. And I never expected him to be real. I never expected. Sometimes I lay in bed with my husband and just say, does it just blow your mind? It's just so incomprehensible to me to have the honor to even address an entity that cares on a level that's so far beyond what we are even familiar with, that it's remarkable to me. I started meeting people from all walks of life and all different religious beliefs. I remember a guy named Walter who was way into Chinese Taoism. And he introduced me to that concept with the Tao of Pooh, the book, The Tao of Pooh. And I read it, and then I read The Tale of Piglet and started really getting in and digging deep and trying to find truth. And just piece by piece, these remarkable people came into my life who all had different pieces. And I heard a quote once that the master comes to us in the form of a puzzle, and he comes one piece at a time.
I love that.
And that each individual piece, it's not easily recognizable, just one piece, but that gradually it comes together into this whole. And that's the greatest miracle for me. And by miracle, I don't mean outside of natural law. I mean extraordinary as compared to the ordinary, and the wonder of it all.
Yeah.
I think I told you once that on my tombstone, which is funny coming from someone who loves words like I do, I just want the word "oh." Oh, it's blown my mind and expanded my heart to places and experiences that I never imagined were even possible.
Yeah. I love that. And I imagine after we die that, oh, will happen again.
Oh, a lot of O's,
Oh.
which is good, right?
Yes.
Because
Yes. Maybe give us some experiences that you've had with God directly that you feel are miraculous or that feel changed you or took you on that journey with
well,
the Lord.
there's so many multiple pieces of that puzzle, Liza, and that is something that concerns me sometimes. I think we have a tendency to pick up one piece and to say, this is God, or this is the miracle. And often it's because a prayer has been answered the way that we had hoped, a healing has taken place the way that we had hoped. I actually think the greater miracle is when it doesn't happen the way we hope, and somehow inside our soul stretches to accept and understand on some level, even if it's just the, infantile faith, beginnings of faith, that he's still there. And it's not a magic genie that we rub the lamp and 3 wishes, and when we get what we want, God is good. Because I haven't gotten a lot of what I've wanted, and yet I've gotten everything and beyond. So it's such what seems a dichotomy, that it's either this or that, but I think it's all of that and more.
Yeah.
Which is phenomenal. So I can name many specific experiences. I do keep a journal. It's a personal journal. It's called my Tender Mercies journal. And in there, I've cataloged countless stories, dozens and dozens, where I have seen and felt the hand of God in my life beyond question. But they are so deeply personal to me that it's not something that I would ever publish. And I just think it's beautiful. It's hypocritical too, because I love reading others' accounts. And I love listening to your podcast and to others, where I get to hear others' accounts, but I don't think that defines God.
No. And I think that God is such a different concept to us individually that it's hard to define God.
Yes.
And I think that this is more of a celebration of the times we see him in our lives, where we recognize his hand and that glorification of, I'm just in awe of God in my life.
That's it.
Yeah.
And once again, I quote C.S. Lewis, because I love that quote of his, where he's talking about the sun. The sun is up in the sky at midday. And it's not that he can see the sun that makes him believe in it. It's that he can see everything else by it. And I love that, because that's how I feel. It's not that I see God or that I've seen an angel. I believe that those happenings occur, but that's not it for me. It's that my entire purview, my outlook, I know how I used to think. I know how I used to feel. I had one of my stepfathers, I used to number them. You've heard me say that. Number 5. And many of them were horrific, abusive, uneducated, ex-cons. These men, some of them taught me reprehensible habits and thought processes.
Right.
It was a dog-eat-dog world. If someone's car is stolen, well, they shouldn't have been driving it and parked it there. Right. That's the mentality, right? The mentality is just so completely different from what I have now. And yes, I can see how some people would say, well, education will do that. Yeah, but even my education, it took me 30 years to get a bachelor's degree, and I tested out of half of it, right? So it's kind of a patchwork quilt. And then, of course, my master's degree is in rhetoric. And yes, that does require deeper thinking, we would hope, before they hand you the paper. But it's a literal shift and change in how I see a fellow human being. I see them as godlike, even when they can't see it themselves, or when they're completely dark and it appears that there's no light there. We just need a reason to be good sometimes. I think it's easy to be bad. It's the default setting when you don't know any better.
Yeah.
But we need a reason to be good. And that reason has come in my life is remarkable.
And so for you, what is that reason specifically?
I have a quote in my bonus room, and it says, choose good for the sake of good. Don't choose good so that the genie will give you your wishes. Don't choose good because you want others to look at you and admire you and venerate the way that you live your life. If all else was against you, choose good because you desire it. And because good is good. And to me, that's the greatest miracle, Liza, is that day after day, from the media, you would never get this, but that there are millions of people waking up and going forward in their lives, and that they're choosing good.
Yes.
That is nothing short of miraculous.
Yeah.
Especially when so many things are pushing the opposite. And yet there are so many people that say, no, I'm choosing good for the sake of good. I'm honoring this promise I made, or I'm lifting this person, or I'm pulling over on the side of the road to help them with a flat tire. Those are the miracles.
I think that is remarkable. And I think it shows and demonstrates our divine nature, that we truly do come from divinity and we desire goodness. And I think that is amazing too. That is one of those wonders that you go, wow, we are
Right.
beautiful people.
Right. But we can also be horrible.
Absolutely.
And that's the miracle,
Yes.
right? That these beings with free will interact daily.
Yes.
Right?
I
That's
know.
the miracle.
Yes.
And the miracle that I'm not a horrible person, it completely blows my mind that I care,
Mm-hmm.
that people matter, that life matters, that poetry matters. That's mind-boggling.
So
Truly.
how did you come to that place? Because looking at your background and the ordinary, the things you grew up in, how did you come to see that mind shift that you're talking about?
I began to make it my life's aim to figure out if it was real or not.
Mm-hmm.
And if it wasn't real, then I'm done. And I still say that. I do belong to a particular church today, but if I found out tomorrow that it wasn't the place for me, I would move on, because I want truth. I want absolute truth. And that has come in so many ways I didn't expect. There have been many people, but perhaps the most significant individual in my life is my mentor, and her name is Esther Rasband. And I met Esther. I went in to see my clergy because my life was a mess. It was basically the beginning of 12 steps, right? My life is unmanageable, completely unmanageable. I can see that. And what can I do about it? So I went in to see him, and bless his heart, he put his hands in a steeple and he closed his eyes and he thought and he listened to what I was saying. I'm 18 or 19 bawling, about how messy everything is. And he says, there's someone you need to meet.
Hmm.
And it was his wife. And I went over to their home and I met her, and she has been a significant influence for good in my life. She is just a brilliant, intelligent, pragmatic, faith-filled, based in solid doctrine person. And that is phenomenal to me. I remember one time we went shopping at a bookstore, and she just started throwing all these books right in this little hand basket. She said, today your education begins. It was kind of this Socratic experience, right? I mean, I didn't even know who Socrates was. I'm a tabula rasa. Let's write. And she threw all these books in there. Well, they're books that a lot of high school students, those who actually completed school, have probably read, but I had never heard of them. Animal Farm, Brave New World, Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Just so many remarkable books like this. And the condition was I could live with her, which I did. I moved in with them. And I could live with them as long as I would read the book and then talk with her afterwards. And then I had a list of chores, cleaning the house and that sort of thing.
Wow.
But imagine my little pea brain trying to read Voltaire.
Wow.
Or being introduced to Alexander Pope or Dante's Divine Comedy. Mm-hmm. And I was convinced that I was stupid. My mother thought I was brilliant. I think it's because I'm a very verbal person and could articulate myself from a young age. My mother took me into California's school system when I was in 7th grade and had me tested for the MGM program. At the time, that was the mentally gifted minors. Uh-huh. And I went in and took all their tests and failed everything gloriously.
Wow.
So, but I was convinced that I was stupid. And so all those years later, being introduced to these works, reading The Pearl and wrestling with concepts, ethical concepts, mm-hmm. and truth. I believe that literature is the pursuit of truth. Mm-hmm. So it coincided very well with where I was headed as far as seeking truth. Mm-hmm. I have read Wordsworth and had tears pour down my face because I feel like he's a brother. I feel like if I could even stand in the same room with him and say, I too have felt such things and wondered. And so to find this world of seekers, that was life-changing. And also to discover that I was intelligent. Now, I was still ignorant and still am, which is beautiful, right? To recognize our ignorance. I'm okay with that because I'm not happy staying there. But one of the books Esther had me read was Madame Bovary. I mentioned that, by Gustave Flaubert. It's in one of the top 100 books in the world. Just to show you, I was intelligent, but this is the journey. At 23, I was 23 now, I read Madame Bovary. Esther and I talked, and she said, "What did you think?" Stupidest book I have ever read. Why would the same thing I hear my students say
Right.
about sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Which basically just means I don't understand.
I didn't understand.
There's no place for me to reconcile this or to even comprehend it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was at 23. 12 years later, I'm 35. I've been married for several years. I have 2 children. And I called Esther with a problem. And she said, "Read Madame Bovary again."
Huh.
I did. And tears just going down my face. This is the most remarkable work written. And I've since shared it with my children. They've read it. My son said, "I think every 21 plus year old needs to read this book before getting into a relationship." There are such deep themes there. But looking back, I was Madame Bovary. That's why I hated it. I couldn't accept that. I couldn't see it. So I knew, but I wouldn't know. And that's willful ignorance. And there's a difference.
Yes. Hearing all these things, it reminds me of the quote that says, "When the student is ready, the teacher will appear."
Absolutely.
And it sounds like you have had just beautiful mentors and teachers helping you along your path, whether they're actual people or authors or, just direct experiences through the Spirit, but always you are a seeker, you are a learner. And
Yes. And to come see the grand beauty of it all, even just a glimpse. I just read Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. My daughter asked me, "Have you read this book?" I thought I'd read everything he'd written.
I've never
I
heard
love
of that
him.
one. Yeah, I love
I
it
hadn't
too.
either.
Yeah.
Liza, wow.
Really?
As I was reading it, I thought, this is my journey. And there comes a point where the protagonist is invited to see or not see, and she refuses to see. Later, she entertains the possibility that maybe there was something there, and she begins to see. And that's remarkable. That's miraculous.
Yes.
And it's a remarkable book. Anyone who loves fairy tales, read Till We Have Faces.
I'm going to look that one up
It's
too.
amazing. I couldn't put it down. I read it in 2 days.
Wow. I had an experience. I was in deep contemplation, meditation, and, praying, conversing with the Lord and asking for further light and knowledge. Like, okay, I think I'm ready for more.
Right.
As if I can assess that, right?
Right.
And the Spirit said to me, if you want more, basically the message was, be open and don't think you're right. Don't think you know everything. And I loved that. And it just sounds like this is your journey of that openness. And the minute we think we see, the minute we think we know, we close up. And
that's so true.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I love reading religious works from many different religions. When I study, I pull up the Bible online and I read many different versions of the same verses to gain that insight from other viewpoints. Like I said, I do belong to a specific religion right now, but I just love that truth is truth, and you can find it if you're willing to see it.
Yeah.
It's all around.
Yeah. I love that. Amen to that. And
right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So you asked for a specific experience, and this just came to mind. We were in Montana on a trip. I don't remember much of it. I was in 5th grade. It was my mother's boyfriend. He was a heavy drinker. I was out in the lake playing, like kids do, 5th grade. And this man truly hated me, and I don't blame him. I hated him too. So the feeling was mutual. And my mother was on the shore. She'd been drinking, wasn't really a part of the situation. And he came out in the water, and I saw the look on his face. And there was no question in my mind where this was going to end. He was completely inebriated.
Mm.
And he grabbed me and held me under the water. And I struggled. My mother always taught us, if anyone tries to harm you, you rip whatever you have to rip. You do whatever you have to do. And I was a wildcat. I did everything I could. But a fifth grader against a drunk adult, it's not much of a competition. And there was a point with all of this violent situation where I felt complete peace. I felt that remarkable peace that I have since read about in many other people's accounts. And my guess, my conjecture is my body must have gone limp because he pulled me up out of the water. And I was vomiting and just out of my mind, and somehow made it back to shore. But I've never forgotten that peace. And so when something comes in my life, I look for that feeling of peace.
Wow.
And if there are vestiges of it.
Wow. Wow. And I have heard you share that experience of nearly drowning and having that peace wash over you. And I love that, because I'm sure that has been a guiding feeling for you to look for in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And because of that, I became a hospice volunteer in my pursuit for truth. Death is a big part of life. And I've been reading a lot of NDEs. And so I've had the privilege to sit with someone at that moment when they leave this life, and just the pieces of all of those experiences coming together into one. My fear of death is actually not too great. The dying, I'm a coward.
Right. How it will happen.
I have MS. I really don't want to slowly become reliant, unable to take care of myself. That would not be a desirable thing. And as you know, Drake has MS. So he, in the last 8 years, he's in a wheelchair. And I'm his caregiver. And yeah, our neurologist calls us his special children. So any awards I missed growing up in school, I got one now.
That's funny.
Yeah, we're his special children. That the challenges can be breathtakingly difficult. There was a day, Liza, when we were driving in for his monthly infusion that sustains his life. It was a few years ago. It had been a few brutal weeks. We got in the handicap van, we're driving in, and we both were crying. We both had tears going down our faces. And my husband said, "It's just so hard. How do you keep going? How do we keep going?" And I went where I know I can go. And in my mind, I started praying. And I just said, "Father, I don't mean to complain, but it's me again. And, this is feeling pretty tough. And there's not a lot of air to breathe right now." And I said, "This is remarkable to me." I didn't have peace. In a second, I had an understanding. And the understanding was, you will look back on this moment and call yourself blessed.
Wow.
Because things will get harder.
Oh.
And that doesn't sound like something any of us want to hear.
No.
But I want it real. Yeah. And now I look back and think, it's kind of like looking back when you're 12 and you're 16. And you say, wow, I actually had it pretty good. What was I thinking? And I believed the message. And it's helped me to every moment since to say, thank you for this moment that we're laughing. Thank you for this moment that the leaves are shimmering on the aspen trees, or thank you for this moment.
That's a beautiful message. And I think one that we could all practice, honestly, in life, being grateful for moments of joy, of calm, of struggle, just those moments of experience.
Absolutely.
My daughter and Annie and I were talking last night. She's really struggling right now in school. She's 16. She's just doing so much. And I said, Annie, I know you won't believe me right now, but one day you will look back on this and be so grateful because you had this experience. And all of this is just experience. And it's beautiful, every part of it.
What did
So
she say?
she goes, I don't think so, Mom. She goes, I know you think that, but I don't think I'll ever be grateful for this. I said, I think you will, but it's okay that you don't know that yet.
Right. And don't we say the same thing to God all the time?
Oh, yes.
All the
Yes.
time. And then that's where my tombstone comes from.
Oh, now I see. Yeah.
Now, and I love that so many of the parables and miracles in the Bible come from healing what? A
Our
blind,
sight. Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And that we are so blind. It amazes me how blind I am. It's remarkable to be this blind and to have those moments where maybe an insight, those epiphanies, and clearly there is much more to this universe that I know nothing about.
Right. Absolutely. Anything else you wanted to share or lessons that you wanted to tell us that you've learned or anything else?
A few years ago, I spoke at an education week. And for the topic for one of the classes I taught, it was called The Long Dark Night of the Soul. And it actually comes from a priest, I believe it was the 17th century, who wrote a poem called The Long Dark Night of the Soul. And it's basically what you told Annie. If there's anyone hearing this who is, taking that walk of the long dark night, I would just want to say that from the brief moments that deity has touched my soul and imprinted something that I cannot explain, that the journey is worth every step and that the miraculous surrounds us in the ordinary.
That's beautiful.
Thank you, beautiful.
You're amazing. Thank you for sharing your testimony, your experiences, your journey. It's remarkable is the word I keep wanting to say.
He is remarkable. Isn't it crazy that he can take these broken sticks and do something? Draw that straight line.
Just that wisdom and depth of life experience, I find, which I teach human development. I find that so fascinating, our development through life and how we change and how we grow and what we come from and how resilient we are. Like that's so inspirational to me.
That's it right there, Liza. That's it, what you just said.
Yeah, it is powerful. Anyway, thank you, Paulette.
Love you.
Love you too.
Thank you so much for listening to this miracle story. Please subscribe to my channel if you liked it. You can also find me on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. And remember to notice and celebrate miracles everywhere, because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen.